Eleanor May Thompson sat in her worn velvet armchair, the same one where she and Harold had spent countless evenings listening to country music on their old radio. The Nebraska wind rattled the farmhouse windows as she clutched the concert ticket in her weathered hands, her fingers tracing the bold letters. George Strait, the final farewell tour, Austin, Texas. At 78 years old, Ellie had been following George Strait's career since 1981, when Unwound first played on KRVN radio while she was hanging laundry on the line. Harold had teased her about her cowboy crush, but he'd always indulged her passion, driving her to Omaha for concerts and surprising her with albums on birthdays. Now, 2 years after Harold's funeral, the house felt emptier than the vast Nebraska plains surrounding it. Her daughter, Patricia Ann Morrison, called daily from Denver, worry evident in her voice. Her son, Robert James Thompson, visited twice a month from Lincoln, always suggesting she move to an assisted living facility. "Mom, you can't be serious about this," Patricia had said during their last phone call. "Austin is over 600 miles away. You haven't driven that far in years." But Ellie had made up her mind. George Strait had announced this would be his final tour, and at her age, she knew this might be her last chance. The ticket had cost her nearly $300, money she'd saved from selling Harold's tools, but it represented something more valuable than cash: hope. The morning of her departure, March 15th, dawned crisp and clear. Ellie loaded her 2010 Honda Civic with a small suitcase, her medications in a pill organizer, and a thermos of coffee. She'd mapped out the route carefully. Interstate 80 to Interstate 35, straight down through Kansas and into Texas. 14 hours of driving, broken into 2 days with an overnight stop in Wichita. As she pulled out of her gravel driveway, Ellie glanced in the rearview mirror at the farmhouse where she'd lived for 52 years. Harold's ghost seemed to wave from the porch, his phantom voice whispering, "Go on, darling, chase that dream." The first day of driving went smoothly. The Kansas landscape stretched endlessly before her, golden wheat fields dancing in the wind. She sang along to George Strait songs on her CD player, her voice cracking on the high notes, but her spirit soaring. In Wichita, she checked into a modest motel, calling Patricia to report her safe arrival. "Please reconsider, Mom," Patricia pleaded. "I can fly down and drive you home tomorrow." "Patty, I've been listening to George Strait longer than you've been alive. This isn't just about a concert. It's about proving to myself that I'm still Eleanor May Thompson, not just some old widow waiting to die." The second day proved more challenging. Ellie's arthritis flared up after hours of gripping the steering wheel, and she had to stop frequently to stretch her legs. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly as she entered Austin's city limits, the traffic more intense than anything she'd experienced in rural Nebraska. She'd booked a room at the Riverside Motel, a budget accommodation 15 minutes from the Moody Center. The desk clerk, a young man named Marcus Rodriguez with kind eyes and a genuine smile, noticed her George Strait t-shirt. "Big fan?" he asked, processing her check-in. 43 years and counting," Ellie replied, her eyes twinkling. "This is his farewell tour." "That's amazing. My grandmother loves him too. She's been trying to get tickets for months." That evening, Ellie treated herself to dinner at a local barbecue joint, Austin's Smokehouse, where the owner, Thomas "Tommy" Mitchell, noticed her Nebraska license plates. "Long way from home," Tommy observed, refilling her sweet tea. "Sometimes the best things in life require a journey," Ellie replied, savoring the brisket that reminded her of Harold's weekend grilling. The concert was scheduled for the following evening, March 17th. Ellie spent the day exploring Austin, visiting the Country Music Hall of Fame satellite location and browsing vintage record stores. She bought a new George Strait t-shirt, navy blue, with his signature embroidered on the front, and wore it proudly as she walked down 6th Street, feeling more alive than she had in months. That night, she called her neighbor back home, Dorothy Ellen Winchester, who'd been collecting her mail. Dot, I feel like I'm 25 again, Ellie laughed into the phone. This city has such energy. I understand why people love it here. Just promise me you'll be careful tomorrow, Dorothy cautioned. Those concert crowds can be rough. I've survived 78 Nebraska winters. I think I can handle some Texas music fans. The morning of March 17th arrived with unseasonable heat for early spring. The temperature was already 78 degrees by 9 a.m., with forecasts predicting it would reach 95 degrees by afternoon. Ellie had planned to arrive at the venue early to secure a good spot in the general admission section, despite having purchased a seat ticket. She wanted to be as close as possible to her idol. She dressed carefully in her new t-shirt, comfortable jeans, and her best walking shoes, white leather Reeboks that Harold had bought her for their 50th wedding anniversary. Around her neck, she wore a small silver locket containing Harold's photo and a tiny four-leaf clover he'd given her on their first date. At 11 a.m., she drove to the Moody Center, her heart racing with anticipation. The parking lot was already filling with cars bearing license plates from across the country: Oklahoma, Louisiana, Arkansas, New Mexico. The sight filled her with camaraderie. She wasn't the only one who'd traveled far for this moment. As she approached the venue, she could see other fans already gathering, some with camping chairs and coolers, others simply standing in the growing line. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation, conversations flowing between strangers, united by their love for the king of country music. Ellie took her place in line behind a young couple from Dallas, Jennifer Ann Davis and her boyfriend, Michael "Mike" Ryan Patterson. Jennifer noticed Ellie's Nebraska plates on the keychain hanging from her purse. "Wow, you came all the way from Nebraska?" Jennifer asked, her Texas accent warm and friendly. 14 hours of driving, Ellie replied proudly, "but George Strait is worth every mile." "That's incredible," Mike added. "This is our third time seeing him, but we've never met anyone who traveled that far." As the hours passed, the line grew longer and the sun grew hotter. Ellie had brought a small folding chair and a bottle of water, but she'd underestimated the intensity of the Texas heat. The concrete radiated warmth through her shoes, and despite the shade provided by the building's overhang, the temperature seemed to climb steadily. Other fans around her were similarly affected. An older gentleman from Louisiana, William Bill Jackson Carter, kept wiping his brow with a bandana. A middle-aged woman from Oklahoma, Susan Marie Thompson, no relation, had purchased a small battery-powered fan that she shared generously with those around her. "First time in Texas heat?" asked Robert Bobby Lee Harrison, a local fan who'd brought a large umbrella to share shade with nearby concert-goers. "We get hot summers in Nebraska," Ellie replied, though she was beginning to feel lightheaded. "But this is something else entirely." The crowd continued to swell as the afternoon wore on. By 3 p.m., the line stretched around the building, with an estimated 3,000 people waiting for the doors to open at 6 p.m. The heat had become oppressive, with the concrete acting like a giant oven, trapping and reflecting the sun's rays. Ellie began to feel the first signs that something was wrong. Her vision occasionally blurred when she stood up too quickly, and her heart seemed to be beating irregularly. She'd been taking medication for high blood pressure for years, but lately she'd been forgetting doses, especially during the stress of planning this trip. She tried to hide her discomfort from the friendly fans around her, not wanting to worry anyone or create a fuss. When Jennifer offered to save her place in line while she found some air conditioning, Ellie politely declined. "I've waited too long for this moment to risk losing my spot," she said with a determined smile. But as 4 p.m. approached and the temperature soared to 93 degrees, Ellie's body began to betray her determination. Her breathing became shallow, and she found herself gripping the metal barriers for support. The excited chatter of fellow fans seemed to fade into a distant hum, replaced by a rushing sound in her ears. Dorothy Mae Stevens, a nurse from San Antonio who was also in line, noticed Ellie's distress. "Ma'am, are you feeling all right?" Dorothy asked, her professional instincts kicking in. "You look a little pale." "Just the heat," Ellie replied weakly, though she was beginning to feel nauseated. "I'll be fine once we get inside." But Ellie wouldn't make it inside. At 4:23 p.m., as she attempted to take a sip from her water bottle, her knees buckled. The bottle fell from her hands, water splashing onto the hot concrete, as Eleanor Mae Thompson collapsed onto the pavement, her George Strait t-shirt the last thing she saw before everything went black. The reactions around her were immediate and intense. Jennifer screamed for help while Mike rushed to Ellie's side. Dorothy, the nurse, quickly assessed the situation, checking Ellie's pulse and breathing, while someone called 911. "Give her some space," Dorothy called out, as concerned fans pressed closer. "She's unconscious but breathing. Help is on the way." Within minutes, the sound of sirens could be heard approaching the venue. The excited atmosphere of the concert line had transformed into one of urgent concern, as hundreds of strangers found themselves united not by music, but by worry for a fellow fan who had traveled so far to fulfill a dream. As the paramedics arrived and began working on Ellie, none of them could have imagined how this moment would change not only her life, but touch the hearts of everyone involved, including the man she'd traveled 1,000 miles to see. The first chapter of an extraordinary story was just beginning. The Austin Fire Department paramedics arrived at 4:28 p.m., their red and white ambulance cutting through the concerned crowd that had formed around Eleanor Mae Thompson. Lead paramedic Christina Marie Rodriguez and her partner, David Anthony Mitchell, quickly assessed the situation as Dorothy Stevens provided a succinct medical briefing. 78-year-old female collapsed approximately 5 minutes ago, Dorothy reported professionally. Pulse is rapid and thready, breathing shallow but present. She was complaining of heat exhaustion before losing consciousness. Christina knelt beside Ellie, immediately noting the woman's pale complexion and the way her new George Strait t-shirt was soaked with perspiration. The heat radiating from the concrete was intense, and she could see that many other concert-goers were also struggling with the temperature. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Christina called, gently shaking Ellie's shoulder. When there was no response, she turned to her partner. "Dave, let's get her vitals and start an IV. This heat is brutal. She's probably severely dehydrated." As they worked, Jennifer Davis knelt nearby, clutching Ellie's purse, which had fallen when she collapsed. Inside, she found Ellie's identification and medical information card, which listed her as taking medications for hypertension and arthritis. "Her name is Eleanor Thompson," Jennifer announced. "She drove here from Nebraska. She told us she's been a George Strait fan for over 40 years. The crowd of fans had formed a protective circle around the medical scene, many holding up umbrellas and jackets to provide shade. The sense of community was palpable. These weren't just strangers anymore, but fellow music lovers concerned about one of their own. Christina checked Ellie's blood pressure and found it dangerously low. "BP is 80/50, heart rate 1 to 10 and irregular," she called to Dave, who was already preparing an IV bag. "We need to get her cooled down and rehydrated fast." Dr. Sarah Elizabeth Montgomery was just finishing her shift at St. David's Medical Center when the call came in about the heat exhaustion victim. As the head of the emergency department, she'd seen her share of concert-related emergencies. But something about this case, an elderly woman who'd traveled from Nebraska, caught her attention. "I'll take this one," she told the receiving nurse, Janet Louise Parker. "ETA is 10 minutes. When the ambulance arrived, Christina provided a rapid-fire update as they wheeled Ellie into the trauma bay. Eleanor Thompson, age 78, collapsed at the George Strait concert line. History of hypertension, medications irregular. Responded briefly in the ambulance, but lost consciousness again. vitals stabilized with fluids, but she's still hypotensive. Doctor, Montgomery immediately took charge, her experienced hands checking Ellie's pupils, listening to her heart, and reviewing the EKG results that showed irregular rhythms. What she saw concerned her deeply. "This isn't just heat exhaustion," she told Christina. "Look at this EKG. She's having cardiac arrhythmias." "Janet, I need a complete metabolic panel, cardiac enzymes, and let's get cardiology down here." As the medical team worked, word spread through the hospital about the elderly fan who'd traveled so far for a concert. Nurse practitioner Amanda Joy Richardson, who'd been treating another patient, paused by Ellie's bedside. "Poor thing," Amanda murmured, noticing the George Strait t-shirt that the medical team had carefully preserved. She came all this way just to see her idol. Dr. Montgomery's examination revealed more than anyone had initially suspected. Ellie wasn't just suffering from heat exhaustion, she was experiencing atrial fibrillation, a dangerous, irregular heartbeat that had likely been developing for months. The stress of the long drive, the heat, and the excitement had triggered a medical crisis that could have been fatal. "She's lucky those paramedics got to her when they did," Dr. Montgomery explained to the team. "Another 10 minutes in that heat, and we might be looking at a very different outcome." Meanwhile, back at the concert venue, news of Ellie's collapse had spread through the line of waiting fans. Marcus Rodriguez, the motel desk clerk who checked her in, heard about the incident from a co-worker whose girlfriend had been in the concert line. "Wait, Eleanor Thompson?" Marcus asked. "Older lady from Nebraska? She's staying at our motel. She was so excited about this concert." Marcus immediately called his manager, explaining the situation. Without hesitation, they decided to extend Ellie's stay at no charge and asked Marcus to visit the hospital during his break to check on her condition. Tommy Mitchell, the barbecue restaurant owner, also heard the news through Austin's tight-knit music community. He immediately prepared a care package of comfort food, knowing that when Ellie woke up, she'd need nourishment and familiar flavors. "Nobody should be alone in a hospital, especially someone who traveled that far for something they love," Tommy told his wife, Margaret Rose Mitchell, as they prepared homemade soup and cornbread. At 7:30 p.m., as George Strait was taking the stage just 5 miles away, Ellie began to stir in her hospital bed. Dr. Montgomery was reviewing her test results when Janet noticed movement. "Doctor, she's waking up," Janet called softly. Ellie's eyes fluttered open, confusion evident as she tried to focus on her surroundings. The bright hospital lights were a stark contrast to the outdoor concert venue where she'd last been conscious. Where am I?" Ellie whispered, her voice hoarse. "You're in St. David's Medical Center, Mrs. Thompson." "Doctor," Montgomery said gently, pulling up a chair beside the bed. "You collapsed at the concert venue. Do you remember feeling unwell?" The memories came flooding back. The heat, the dizziness, the excitement about finally seeing George Strait. Ellie's eyes filled with tears as she realized what had happened. "The concert," she said weakly. "Did I miss it? I came so far." "Doctor." Montgomery's heart broke at the disappointment in Ellie's voice. "I'm afraid the concert is happening right now, but Mrs. Thompson, we need to talk about your health. You've had some serious heart rhythm problems." As doctor, Montgomery explained Ellie's condition, the atrial fibrillation, the need for medication adjustments, and the recommendation for cardiac monitoring. Ellie listened with growing despair. Not only had she missed the concert she'd traveled 1,000 miles to see, but her health issues might prevent her from ever making such a journey again. "I should call my daughter," Ellie said quietly. "Patricia will be so worried when she finds out." Janet helped Ellie make the call, and as expected, Patricia was both relieved and upset. "Mom, I told you this trip was too much for you," Patricia said, her voice mixing concern with frustration. "I'm booking a flight right now. I'll be there tomorrow morning to drive you home." After the call, Ellie lay in her hospital bed, staring at the ceiling tiles and listening to the distant sounds of the city. Through her window, she could see the glow of downtown Austin, where thousands of fans were experiencing the magic she'd dreamed of for months. Dr. Montgomery returned around 9 p.m. to check on her patient, finding Ellie awake but dejected. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Thompson?" "Physically? Better, I suppose, but my heart feels broken in more ways than one," Ellie replied honestly. "I've been planning this trip for 6 months. I saved every penny, drove 14 hours, and now you're alive and getting the medical care you need," Dr. Montgomery interjected gently. "Mrs. Thompson, if you hadn't collapsed when you did, if those fans hadn't gotten you help so quickly, you might have had a massive heart attack. Sometimes our bodies know what we need better than we do." Around 10 p.m., Marcus Rodriguez arrived during his break, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers he'd picked from the motel's garden. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm Marcus from the Riverside Motel. I wanted to check on you." Ellie was touched by the gesture from someone she'd barely met. "You didn't have to come all this way." "In Austin, we take care of music fans," Marcus smiled, "especially ones brave enough to drive from Nebraska for George Strait." As the evening wore on, more unexpected visitors arrived. Tommy Mitchell brought his care package. Dorothy Stevens stopped by after the concert to check on the patient she'd helped. And even Jennifer and Mike came by with a small gift, a concert program they'd managed to get signed by some of the opening acts. "We kept thinking about you during the show," Jennifer explained. "Everyone in line was asking about the lady from Nebraska. You touched a lot of hearts today." Dr. Montgomery observed these interactions with growing amazement. In her 20 years of emergency medicine, she'd rarely seen such an outpouring of concern from strangers. There was something special about Eleanor Thompson that inspired kindness in everyone she met. Late that night, as Ellie finally drifted off to sleep with the help of mild sedatives, Dr. Montgomery made an unusual decision. She pulled out her personal cell phone and began making some calls. If Eleanor Thompson had touched so many lives in just one day, perhaps there was something more that could be done for her. The first call was to her brother-in-law, James Robert Sullivan, who worked in the music industry in Nashville. The second was to a contact at the venue management company, and the third was to someone whose response would surprise even her. As Ellie slept peacefully for the first time in days, surrounded by flowers and gifts from new friends, the wheels were already in motion for something that would prove that sometimes the most beautiful music comes not from a stage, but from the human heart. The angels in scrubs had done more than just save Eleanor Thompson's life. They had set in motion a chain of events that would restore her faith in the magic of dreams. Patricia Ann Morrison arrived at St. David's Medical Center at 8:30 a.m. on March 18th, her face etched with worry and barely controlled anger. She'd taken the first flight from Denver, spending the entire trip oscillating between relief that her mother was alive and frustration at what she saw as a reckless decision. "Mom, what were you thinking?" Patricia said, settling into the chair beside Ellie's bed. "You could have died for a concert." Ellie, looking much better after a night of rest and proper medical care, reached for her daughter's hand. "Patty, I know you're upset, but I need you to understand something. Since your father died, I've felt like I was just existing. This trip, this dream, it made me feel alive again." Dr. Montgomery, who had worked through the night to ensure Ellie's continued stability, entered the room with Ellie's discharge papers and a treatment plan. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson. You're looking much better, and you must be Patricia. Your mother mentioned you were flying in." Patricia stood to shake the doctor's hand. "Thank you for taking such good care of her, Dr. Montgomery. I understand she gave you quite a scare. Actually, your mother has been quite the sensation around here." Dr. Montgomery smiled. "The story of her 1,000-mile journey has inspired our entire staff. In fact, I have something interesting to tell you both." Before Dr. Montgomery could continue, there was a knock at the door. Marcus Rodriguez entered, followed by Tommy Mitchell, Dorothy Stevens, and several other people Ellie had met during her brief time in Austin. "We hope it's okay that we came by," Marcus said. "We wanted to see how you were doing before you left." Patricia looked around in amazement. "I'm sorry. Who are all these people?" "These are the angels who helped save your mother's life, Doctor," Montgomery explained. "And they're not the only ones who've been asking about her." Tommy stepped forward, carrying a large basket. "Mrs. Thompson, we took up a collection among the local business owners. There's enough here to cover your extra medical expenses and your extended motel stay." "That's not necessary," Ellie protested, tears forming in her eyes. "You've all done so much already." "In Austin, we take care of our music family," Dorothy added. "Besides, there's more news you need to hear." Dr. Montgomery smiled mysteriously. "Mrs. Thompson, after you fell asleep last night, I made some phone calls. You see, my brother-in-law works in the music industry, and when I told him your story, he was so moved that he started making calls of his own." Patricia frowned, confused. "What kind of calls?" "The kind that led to a very interesting conversation with George Strait's tour management," Dr. Montgomery revealed, "and then with Mr. Strait himself." Ellie's eyes widened in disbelief. "What do you mean?" At that moment, another knock came at the door. This time, it was a woman in professional attire, Susan Elizabeth Crawford, George Strait's tour publicist, accompanied by a man carrying video equipment. "Mrs. Thompson?" Susan asked gently. "I'm Susan Crawford. I work with George Strait's management team. We heard about what happened yesterday, and Mr. Strait asked me to come speak with you personally." The room fell silent, except for the steady beep of Ellie's heart monitor, which had noticeably increased in pace. "I don't understand," Patricia said, still trying to process the situation. Susan pulled up a chair beside Ellie's bed. "Mrs. Thompson, when Mr. Strait learned that a 78-year-old fan had driven 1,000 miles from Nebraska to see him, and that she'd collapsed waiting in line, he was deeply moved. He said that fans like you are the reason he's been able to have such a wonderful career." Ellie's hands trembled as she gripped her blanket. He knows about me. He knows, and he'd like to do something about it. You see, Mr. Strait is staying in Austin for one more day before the tour moves on to Houston. He's arranged for a private acoustic performance this afternoon, just for you, your family, and the people who helped you yesterday. The room erupted in gasps and exclamations. Patricia sat down heavily, overwhelmed by the unexpected turn of events. "I'm dreaming," Ellie whispered. "This can't be real." "It's very real," Susan assured her. "But first, we need to make sure you're medically cleared for the excitement. Dr. Montgomery, is Mrs. Thompson stable enough for this?" Dr. Montgomery consulted Ellie's chart and the latest test results. "Her cardiac rhythm has stabilized with medication. Her electrolytes are normal, and her blood pressure is much improved. As long as she takes it easy and stays hydrated, I think a short, controlled visit would actually be therapeutic." Over the next few hours, the hospital room became a hub of activity. Word had spread through the medical staff, and nurses kept finding excuses to check on the George Strait patient. Maintenance worker Frank Joseph Williams stopped by to share that his late wife had also been a huge fan. Even the hospital chaplain, Reverend Michael Thomas Anderson, visited to offer prayers for Ellie's continued recovery. Patricia, meanwhile, was struggling to process everything. "Mom, I came here to take you home and lecture you about being reckless. I never expected this." "Patty, sometimes life surprises us in the most beautiful ways," Ellie replied, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "Your father always said that good things happen to good people. Maybe he's looking down and arranged all of this." At 2 p.m., Dr. Montgomery personally wheeled Ellie out of the hospital, with Patricia walking alongside and their newfound Austin friends following. Susan Crawford had arranged for a small bus to transport everyone to a private venue, Austin Music Hall, an intimate space typically used for recording sessions. As they drove through Austin, Ellie pressed her face to the window, taking in the city that had shown her such unexpected kindness. The venues where she'd hoped to see George Strait from a distance were now part of a larger story, one where she would meet her hero face to face. The Austin Music Hall was a converted warehouse with excellent acoustics and a cozy, living room-like atmosphere. As they entered, Ellie could see that someone had set up about 20 chairs in a semicircle with a small stage area containing just a stool, a microphone, and an acoustic guitar. "This is surreal," Patricia murmured, helping her mother get comfortable in the front row. Dorothy Stevens sat beside them, still hardly believing she was part of this extraordinary story. "I've been a nurse for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like this." At 2:30 p.m., a side door opened, and George Strait himself walked in, wearing jeans, boots, and a simple button-down shirt. The small group applauded, but Ellie just stared, tears streaming down her face. George walked directly to her, extending his hand. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm George Strait. I'm honored to meet you." Ellie took his hand with both of hers, unable to speak for several moments. Finally, she managed, "Mr. Strait, I can't believe you're here. I can't believe any of this is happening." "Ma'am, when I heard that you'd driven 1,000 miles and ended up in the hospital because you wanted to see me perform, well, that touched my heart in a way I can't describe. Fans like you are the reason I've been blessed to do what I love for all these years." George spent several minutes talking with Ellie, asking about her life in Nebraska, her late husband, and her journey to Austin. He was genuinely interested in her story, asking follow-up questions and listening intently to her answers. "Harold, that was my husband. He always said you were a gentleman," Ellie told him. "He was right. I wish I could have met Harold," George replied. "Anyone who was married to a lady like you for 52 years must have been a special man." Then George took his place on the small stage, picked up his guitar, and began to play. For the next 45 minutes, he performed an intimate acoustic set that included many of Ellie's favorites: "Amarillo Morning," "All My Exes Live in Texas," "The Chair," and "I Cross My Heart." But the most powerful moment came when George dedicated a song specifically to Ellie. This next one is for Eleanor Thompson, who reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place, because it brings people together and creates moments of pure joy. This is "I Can Still Make Cheyenne." As George sang, Ellie closed her eyes and felt Harold's presence beside her. She could almost hear him whispering, "See, darling, I told you good things happen to good people." When the performance ended, George spent another 30 minutes talking with everyone in the room, signing autographs and taking photos. He was particularly interested in hearing from the medical professionals who had cared for Ellie. "Dr. Montgomery, thank you for taking such good care of Mrs. Thompson," he said. "And Dorothy, Marcus, Tommy, all of you, thank you for showing what real community looks like." Before leaving, George gave Ellie a special gift, his personal guitar pick from the previous night's concert, along with a handwritten note that read, "To Eleanor, thank you for reminding me that music is about connection, not just performance. You have a beautiful heart. George Strait." As the afternoon wound down and it was time to leave, Ellie felt overwhelmed by the generosity and kindness she'd experienced. What had started as a medical emergency had transformed into something magical. "I still can't believe this happened," she told Patricia as they prepared to return to the hospital for her final discharge. "Mom, I owe you an apology," Patricia said, tears in her eyes. "I thought this trip was foolish and dangerous, but seeing how you've touched all these people's lives, seeing how they've rallied around you, I understand now that this wasn't just about a concert. It was about living fully, even at 78. Dr. Montgomery, who had been documenting this extraordinary day, approached Ellie with one final surprise. Mrs. Thompson, I've been in medicine for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like what happened here today. With your permission, I'd like to write about your story for our medical journal, not just about your treatment, but about how human connection and kindness can be powerful medicine. Of course, Ellie agreed. If my story can help other people understand the importance of chasing their dreams and showing kindness to strangers, then Harold would be proud. As they left Austin Music Hall, the group that had formed around Ellie exchanged contact information, promising to stay in touch. What had begun as individual acts of kindness had created lasting friendships and connections. The ripple effect of Eleanor Thompson's journey was far from over. In fact, the most surprising chapter was yet to come, as news of her story began to spread far beyond the borders of Austin, Texas. The video that Susan Crawford's team had recorded of George Strait's private performance for Eleanor Thompson was initially intended for the family's personal keepsake. However, after watching the footage that evening, Susan realized they had captured something extraordinary, a moment of pure human connection that transcended typical celebrity interactions. This isn't just about a country music star meeting a fan, Susan told her assistant, Rebecca Ann Martinez, as they reviewed the video at their hotel. This is about what happens when people choose kindness over indifference. With Eleanor's permission, Susan posted a carefully edited 3-minute video on George Strait's official social media accounts. The post included the caption, "When 78-year-old Eleanor Thompson drove 1,000 miles from Nebraska to see George's farewell tour and collapsed from heat exhaustion waiting in line, something beautiful happened. This is what community looks like. Nebraska Nan, Dutch King of Country. Dutch kindness matters." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 6 hours, the video had been shared over 10,000 times. By the next morning, it had reached 100,000 views across all platforms. Major news outlets began picking up the story, with CNN, Fox News, and ABC all reaching out for interviews. Back in Austin, Eleanor was staying an extra day at the Riverside Motel, courtesy of Marcus Rodriguez's generous management, to ensure she was fully recovered before the drive home. She woke up on March 19th to her phone ringing constantly. "Mom, are you seeing this?" Patricia asked excitedly during her morning call. "You're famous. The video of you and George Strait is everywhere. My friends in Denver are calling me about my celebrity mother." Eleanor, who barely understood how social media worked, was bewildered by the attention. "I don't understand, Patty. What video?" Patricia spent the next 20 minutes explaining how the internet worked and why Eleanor's story was resonating with people around the world. Meanwhile, Dr. Montgomery was fielding calls from reporters wanting to interview the doctor who had helped save Nebraska Nan, a nickname that had emerged from the social media coverage. At Good Morning America's studios in New York, producer Jennifer Catherine Walsh was coordinating a live satellite interview with Eleanor for the following morning. The story had all the elements that resonated with viewers: an elderly woman's determination, unexpected kindness from strangers, and a heartwarming resolution. "This is exactly the kind of positive story America needs right now," Jennifer told her team. "Real people, real emotions, real community spirit." Meanwhile, at the country music television headquarters in Nashville, Tennessee, executive producer David William Foster was planning something much bigger. CMT had acquired the rights to air the full private concert video, and David was working on a special 1-hour documentary about Eleanor's journey. "We want to explore not just what happened, but why it happened," David explained to his production team. "What is it about Eleanor Thompson that inspired such an outpouring of kindness? And what does her story tell us about the power of music to connect people?" Back in Austin, Eleanor found herself at the center of a media whirlwind she never could have imagined. Tommy Mitchell's barbecue restaurant had become an unofficial gathering place for reporters, with Tommy serving as Eleanor's unofficial spokesperson and protector. Mrs. Thompson is recovering and spending time with her daughter, Tommy told the growing crowd of journalists. She's overwhelmed by the response, but grateful for all the kind messages she's receiving. Indeed, the messages were pouring in from around the world. The Riverside Motel's fax machine, one of the few still in operation in Austin, was constantly printing letters and well wishes from strangers who had been touched by Eleanor's story. Margaret Elizabeth Chen, a fan from California, wrote, "Mrs. Thompson, your courage to follow your dreams at 78 has inspired me to finally take the trip to Ireland I've been planning for 20 years. Thank you for showing us that age is just a number." Robert Stephen Murphy, a widower from Florida, shared, "I lost my wife last year and have been afraid to do anything alone. Your story has given me the courage to start living again instead of just existing." The most touching messages came from other elderly fans who had been inspired by Eleanor's journey. Dorothy Mae Patterson, an 82-year-old from Oregon, wrote that she had just bought tickets to see her favorite artist, Willie Nelson, despite her family's concerns about her traveling alone. Dr. Montgomery, who had become something of a celebrity herself as the doctor who saved Nebraska Nan, was using the attention to highlight important health issues facing elderly people. Eleanor's story illustrates how easily older adults can develop serious medical conditions without realizing it, she explained during a CNN interview. Her atrial fibrillation had probably been developing for months, but she attributed the symptoms to normal aging. Regular cardiac checkups are essential for people over 70. The story was also inspiring concrete action. The American Heart Association contacted Dr. Montgomery about partnering on a campaign to promote cardiac health awareness among seniors. George Strait's management announced that a portion of proceeds from remaining tour dates would be donated to organizations providing medical care for elderly patients who couldn't afford treatment. Meanwhile, the city of Austin was embracing its role in Eleanor's story. Mayor Angela Christine Rodriguez issued a proclamation declaring March 17th as Eleanor Thompson Day in Austin, celebrating the power of music, kindness, and community to transform lives. Local businesses began creating Eleanor Thompson specials. Austin's Smokehouse added Nebraska Nan's brisket plate to their menu, with proceeds going to the local food bank. The Riverside Motel created the Dreamer's Discount for guests over 70 traveling alone to pursue their passions. But perhaps the most significant development came from an unexpected source, George Strait himself. On March 20th, George called Eleanor personally with a proposition that would change everything. "Eleanor, I've been thinking about what happened in Austin, and I have an idea," George said during their phone conversation, which Eleanor took in her motel room with Patricia listening on speaker. "What kind of idea, Mr. Strait?" Eleanor asked, still amazed that she was having casual phone conversations with her longtime idol. "I want you to be my special guest for the final show of the farewell tour in Las Vegas next month. Not just in the audience, I want you on stage with me, and I want to invite all the people who helped you in Austin to come too, as my guests." Eleanor was speechless. Patricia gripped her mother's hand, both women overwhelmed by the generosity of the offer. "But Mr. Strait," Eleanor finally managed, "that's too much. You've already done so much." "Eleanor, your story has reminded millions of people about what really matters. Following your dreams and treating each other with kindness. That's a message worth celebrating. Besides, I have a feeling Harold would want you to say yes." The mention of her late husband brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. She could almost hear Harold's voice, encouraging her to embrace this incredible opportunity. "Yes," she whispered, then stronger. "Yes, I would be honored." The announcement of Eleanor's special role in George Strait's final farewell show sent the story into another stratosphere of media attention. The Las Vegas show, already sold out, became the most anticipated country music event of the year. Ticket holders, who had paid hundreds of dollars, weren't upset about sharing the spotlight with Eleanor. They were thrilled to be part of what was being called the most heartwarming concert in country music history. As news of the Las Vegas show spread, the story took on new dimensions. Travel companies began offering Eleanor Thompson packages, group tours for seniors who wanted to attend the show. A documentary filmmaker from Los Angeles, Sarah Michelle Thompson, no relation, received approval to follow Eleanor's journey to Las Vegas. The Nebraska media was particularly proud of their native daughter. KRVN Radio, the same station where Eleanor had first heard George Strait in 1981, began playing her story every hour, taking calls from listeners who shared their own memories of Harold and Eleanor from their farming community. Eleanor's neighbor, Dorothy Winchester, became a local celebrity herself, giving interviews about her longtime friend. "Eleanor has always been special," Dorothy told the Omaha World Herald. "She's the kind of person who brings casseroles when you're sick and remembers your birthday every year. She deserves every bit of this happiness." The ripple effects extended far beyond country music. The story was being shared in nursing homes across America, inspiring elderly residents to pursue long-delayed dreams. Social workers reported increased interest in day trips and cultural activities among their older clients. Dr. Amanda Richardson at St. David's Medical Center started a support group called Dream Chasers for patients over 65, encouraging them to set and pursue meaningful goals, regardless of their age or health conditions. Eleanor's story proves that it's never too late to live fully, Dr. Richardson explained to the group. Her courage to make that 1,000-mile journey led to experiences she never could have imagined. The international response was equally remarkable. The BBC featured Eleanor's story as an example of American community spirit at its finest. A Japanese television network sent a crew to Nebraska to film a documentary about small-town American values. Musicians from other genres began reaching out to their own elderly fans. Rock legend Bruce Springsteen arranged a private meet and greet with a 75-year-old fan from New Jersey who had been following his career since the 1970s. Pop star Taylor Swift surprised an 80-year-old grandmother in Tennessee who had been learning to play guitar to her songs. The phenomenon became known as the Eleanor effect, a trend of celebrities and ordinary people alike going out of their way to honor and celebrate elderly fans and community members. As Eleanor prepared for her trip to Las Vegas, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just a few days. "Patty, when I left Nebraska, I just wanted to see George Strait perform one last time," she told her daughter. "I never imagined that one concert would lead to all this." "Mom, I think Dad would say that this isn't about one concert," Patricia replied. "This is about a lifetime of being the kind of person who inspires others to be their best selves." The concert was just the catalyst. Eleanor looked at the pile of letters and gifts that had arrived from around the world, each one representing a life that had been touched by her story. She thought about Harold and how he always believed that good things happened to good people. As she packed for Las Vegas, Eleanor realized that her journey was far from over. The final chapter of her adventure would take place on the biggest stage of her life, in front of thousands of people and millions more watching on television. But more importantly, she had learned that sometimes the most beautiful journeys begin with a single act of courage, and that the ripple effects of kindness and determination can touch lives in ways we never imagine. The girl from rural Nebraska was about to take the stage in Las Vegas, proving that dreams don't have expiration dates and that the human heart's capacity for love and connection knows no boundaries. April 15th, 2024. Las Vegas, Nevada. The MGM Grand Garden Arena buzzed with an electricity that veteran concertgoers had never experienced before. 20,000 George Strait fans from across the globe had gathered for what was being billed as the King's final bow. But everyone knew this night was about more than just music. It was about Eleanor Thompson and the extraordinary journey that had captured the world's heart. Eleanor stood in the artist's green room, wearing an elegant navy blue dress that Patricia had helped her choose, her silver hair styled professionally, and George Strait's guitar pick from Austin hanging on a delicate chain around her neck. At her side were the friends who had become family. Dr. Sarah Montgomery, Marcus Rodriguez, Tommy and Margaret Mitchell, Dorothy Stevens, Jennifer Davis, and several others who had been part of her Austin adventure. "Mrs. Thompson, you look absolutely beautiful," said Rebecca Martinez, George's assistant, as she checked Eleanor's wireless microphone. "Are you nervous?" Eleanor smiled, her eyes twinkling with the same spirit that had driven her to make the 1,000-mile journey from Nebraska. "Honey, I've been nervous about a lot of things in my 78 years, but tonight isn't one of them. Tonight feels like coming home." The pre-show atmosphere was unlike anything the venue had ever seen. Country music television was broadcasting live, with special correspondent Janet Louise Williams providing backstory about Eleanor's journey. The audience included celebrities, politicians, and dignitaries, but the most honored guests were the hundreds of elderly fans who had received free tickets through the Eleanor Thompson Foundation, a charity George had established in her honor to help seniors pursue their dreams. In Section 101, Harold Thompson Jr., Eleanor's grandson, who had flown in from Seattle, sat with his wife and children, holding a framed photo of his grandfather, Harold. "Kids, this is your great-grandmother making history," he told his young children. "Remember this night forever." Backstage, George Strait was putting the finishing touches on a set list that would blend his greatest hits with stories about the fans who had made his career possible. But first, he wanted a private moment with Eleanor. "Eleanor, I need you to know something," George said, taking her hands in his. "In 40 years of performing, I've never been more honored to share a stage with anyone. You represent everything beautiful about music, the way it brings people together, the way it gives us hope, and the way it reminds us what really matters." "Mr. Strait, George, you've given me more than I could have ever dreamed," Eleanor replied. "But more than that, you've shown the world that kindness still matters. Harold would be so proud." At 8 p.m. sharp, the lights dimmed, and George Strait took the stage to thunderous applause. But instead of opening with a song, he spoke directly to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, 33 years ago, I played my first show in Las Vegas at a little club that held maybe 200 people. Tonight, we're here in this magnificent arena, and it's all because of fans like you. But there's one fan in particular who reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place." The crowd erupted as a video screen showed highlights of Eleanor's journey, from her collapse in Austin to her private concert with George. By the time the video ended, there wasn't a dry eye in the arena. "Eleanor Thompson taught me that music isn't about the size of the venue or the number of records sold," George continued. "It's about the connections we make and the moments we share. Eleanor, would you join me out here?" Eleanor walked onto the stage with surprising confidence, waving to the roaring crowd. The standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes, with audience members holding up signs reading, "We love you, Eleanor, Nebraska strong, and dreams have no expiration date." "Eleanor, tell everyone how this adventure started," George said, handing her the microphone. Eleanor looked out at the sea of faces, feeling Harold's presence beside her. "Well, George, it started with a dream and a radio station in Nebraska 43 years ago. My husband Harold, God rest his soul, always said that good things happen to good people who aren't afraid to chase their dreams. I guess he was right. The crowd laughed and cheered as Eleanor shared abbreviated versions of her journey, her natural storytelling ability captivating the massive audience. "I never imagined that wanting to see George Strait would lead to making so many wonderful friends," Eleanor continued, gesturing to the Austin group watching from the side stage. "But that's the thing about dreams. They're not just about the destination, they're about the people you meet along the way." George then launched into a specially crafted set that told the story of American country music through the lens of connection and community. He performed Amarillo Morning while sharing stories about fans who had traveled great distances to see him. During All My Exes Live in Texas, he talked about the Lone Star State's tradition of hospitality, specifically mentioning the Austin community that had rallied around Eleanor. The most powerful moment came when George invited Dr. Montgomery, Marcus, Tommy, and Dorothy onto the stage. "These folks prove that heroes don't wear capes," George said. "They wear scrubs, and they run motels, and they serve barbecue, and they help strangers in parking lots." Eleanor's story isn't just about one brave woman. It's about the community that caught her when she fell. Dr. Montgomery spoke briefly about the importance of pursuing dreams at any age, while emphasizing the medical lesson of Eleanor's story. "Don't ignore your health in pursuit of your dreams. Take care of your body so it can carry you to amazing places." Marcus talked about the hospitality industry's role in making travelers feel welcome, while Tommy shared his philosophy that feeding people is about nourishing souls, not just bodies. The evening's most emotional moment came when George performed "I Cross My Heart," the song he and his wife had chosen for their first dance. He dedicated it to Eleanor and Harold's 52-year marriage, and to all the couples in the audience who had found their forever person. "Eleanor, this one's for you and Harold, and for everyone who believes in love that lasts a lifetime," George said as he began the tender ballad. As he sang, images of Eleanor and Harold's life together played on the screens, their wedding day, raising their children, working the farm, and growing old together. Patricia, watching from the audience, sobbed as she saw her parents' love story celebrated on such a grand stage. But the night's biggest surprise came during the final segment. George brought Eleanor back to center stage and made an announcement that stunned everyone, including Eleanor. "Eleanor, you've taught us all about the power of chasing dreams, no matter how old we are. So I have a proposition for you. How would you like to join me for one more song, not as my guest, but as my duet partner?" Eleanor's eyes widened in shock. "George, I'm not a singer." "Ma'am, with respect, anyone who's lived 78 years with as much love and courage as you have is definitely a singer. Trust me on this one." The band began playing Unwound, the very first George Strait song Eleanor had heard on the radio in 1981. George sang the verses, while Eleanor, encouraged by the wildly supportive crowd, joined in on the choruses. Her voice, weathered by age but strong with emotion, blended beautifully with George's smooth baritone. When the song ended, the arena erupted in the longest-standing ovation in MGM Grand history. Eleanor and George took their bows together, and for a moment, the king of country music stepped aside to let a 78-year-old farm wife from Nebraska receive the adoration of 20,000 fans. "Ladies and gentlemen," George said as the applause finally died down, "Eleanor Thompson, living proof that it's never too late to chase your dreams." As the evening wound down with George performing his classics, Eleanor remained on stage, sometimes singing along, sometimes just standing in amazement at the surreal turn her life had taken. During the final song, "The Cowboy Rides Away," George changed the lyrics slightly. "The cowboy rides away, but the dreams live on, thanks to friends like Eleanor who show us how to be strong." After the show, the celebration continued at a private party in the MGM Grand's penthouse suite. Country music royalty mingled with the Austin heroes, medical professionals, and Eleanor's family. The guest of honor, however, was most interested in talking with the other elderly fans who had attended. "Tell me about your dreams," Eleanor said to each person she met. "What's on your bucket list?" Margaret Rose Williams, an 85-year-old from Montana, shared that she'd always wanted to learn to paint. By the end of the evening, Eleanor had connected her with an art teacher from the group, and arrangements were being made for Margaret's first lesson. James Robert Patterson, a 72-year-old widower from Alabama, mentioned that he'd always wanted to write a book about his late wife. Eleanor introduced him to the documentary filmmaker who had been following her story, and a new project was born. The ripple effects of Eleanor's kindness continued to spread, even at her own celebration. As the evening ended, Eleanor found herself on the hotel balcony overlooking the Las Vegas Strip, with Patricia beside her and their new extended family nearby. "Mom, how does it feel to be famous?" Patricia asked, still marveling at everything that had happened. "I'm not famous, sweetheart," Eleanor replied, looking out at the lights of the city. "I'm just a woman who decided that grief wasn't going to stop me from living. Everything else, George, the concerts, the new friends, those are just blessings that came from refusing to give up on joy." Dr. Montgomery joined them on the balcony, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. "Eleanor, I have some news that I think you'll appreciate. The American Heart Association wants to name their new Senior Cardiac Awareness Program after you. The Eleanor Thompson Heart Health Initiative will provide free screenings and education for rural elderly patients." Eleanor wiped away tears, overwhelmed by the impact her simple journey had created. "Harold always said that God works in mysterious ways. I never imagined that missing one concert would lead to helping so many people." As the night wound down, George Strait made one final gesture. He presented Eleanor with the guitar he had played during their duet, inscribed with the words, "To Eleanor, thank you for reminding us all that the best music comes from the heart. Your friend always, George Strait." "I can't accept this," Eleanor protested. "Ma'am, that guitar has been around the world with me," George replied. "But it's never made music as beautiful as it did tonight when you sang with me. It belongs with you now." The next morning, as Eleanor prepared to return to Nebraska, this time accompanied by Patricia and several of their new Austin friends who wanted to see her farm, she reflected on the incredible journey that had started with a simple decision to chase a dream. The Nebraska farm that had felt so empty after Harold's death would now be filled with new friendships and memories. Eleanor had already made plans for Marcus to visit during harvest season, for Tommy and Margaret to come see authentic Nebraska cornfields, and for Dr. Montgomery to speak at the local hospital about cardiac health. Most importantly, Eleanor had rediscovered something she thought she'd lost forever, the belief that every day held the possibility of magic, if you were brave enough to reach for it. As their plane lifted off from Las Vegas, Eleanor looked down at the city where she'd become an unlikely star and smiled. Somewhere below, the MGM Grand was preparing for its next show, but Eleanor knew that no performance would ever match the power of a 78-year-old woman proving that dreams don't have expiration dates. "Harold," she whispered to the clouds outside her window, "we did it, darling. We really did it." The girl who had left Nebraska as a grieving widow was returning as a symbol of hope for dreamers everywhere. And in farmhouses and nursing homes, concert halls and hospital rooms across America, people were asking themselves the same question Eleanor had asked 6 months earlier. What dream have I been putting off, and what's stopping me from chasing it today? Eleanor Thompson's 1,000-mile journey had ended, but her real legacy, inspiring others to live fully regardless of age or circumstance, was just beginning.